Camels gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction. In the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning. Death and hatred to mankind.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Brandon Cooper. You're watching Shaman Sundays on the day of the bowl of the super with the footballs and the throwing and the things. So thank you for watching me instead of that. I don't know if you caught that halftime show, man. Felt like I was back in kind of high school, man. That was my days with Ursher. Anyway, I caught that much of the game. Let's say hey to some people. Irene Konnichiwa from Japan. How are you? Carol Garcia. How are you, sweetheart? Kimmy Corpse. Wow, we got a bunch of people watching in. Hey, Russell. Who else we got? Ricky. Hey, Ricky, you might want to stick around for this. I don't know if you're working it or not, but I have a amazing guest tonight. We're going to talk about some overseas stuff that you and I kind of probably saw. Is it a good game? Because, I think it's all scripted, but that's something for another show. Okay, who else we got? Oh, my beautiful wife. Hey, sweetheart. Thank you for tuning in. No, interested in paranormal, not football. That's what I'm talking about, Irene. So, my guest tonight, and we're just kind of going to get right into it. His name is John, I hope I say this correctly, Karaku. I think that's Greek. I think I said that right. He'll tell me when he comes on. He is a journalist. He is a former CIA counterterrorism officer, former senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and a former counterterrorism consultant for ABC News. He was responsible for the capture, and we're going to talk about this too, in Pakistan in 2002 of Abu Zubaydah. And he was like, at the time, I'm thinking the number 3. We thought he was like the number 3 guy. That was a big deal. We're going to cover that. It says right here, it was believed to be the 3rd ranking in Al Qaeda. In 2007, Karaku blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program. And let's just put that out there. Waterboarding and some of the stuff that we may or may not have done over there. Actually, no, it's true. We did it. It's not a may or may not. We did it. We tortured. I think Abu Zubaydah got waterboarded like 30 times. I don't know. We're going to get into it. But this man had the cojones and the wherewithal to actually tell the truth. There are good people in agencies like this, but you can see what happens when you're the good person and you come out against torture. He was the 6th whistleblower indicted by the Obama administration under the Espionage Act, a law designed to punish spies. He served 23 months in prison as a result of his whistleblowing. And there's so much more on his bio, which I have linked in. But for the sake of time, let's go ahead and bring on John Karaku.
Close.
Well, okay, how is it? Tell me.
Kyriakou.
Kiriakou.
And it is Greek.
Okay. All right. I was trying to. Oh well. Sorry. Terribly sorry
good.
for
No. Nobody.
the abomination of the name. First of all, thank you so much. And I want to tell my audience this is not the paranormal show that you're tuning in for. I've been giving you guys a heads up for a while. So why it's called Shaman Sundays Declassified. We're going to talk about some CIA and whistleblower stuff. First of all, such an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine.
I mean, I've dealt with some CIA wet team guys overseas, but I've never talked with an analyst. And so thank you so much. You guys are like the cream of the crop as far as
I spent the first half of my career in analysis and then got really bored and switched over to counterterrorism operations, did something completely different.
Yeah, and that puts you in some hot spots, I believe. Did they not have you station chief in Pakistan?
I was the chief of counterterrorism operations in Pakistan after 9/11, but I served in places like Yemen and Saudi Arabia and all over the region. My boss one time said that it was the curse of speaking Arabic, because I said, how come I don't get to go to London and Paris and Rome? I have to go to the worst places on earth.
Right.
He's like, well, that's the curse of speaking Arabic.
I get it. I do get it. So I said that we would start with this. Let's start on September 10th, the day before the Twin Towers. Donald Rumsfeld comes out and announces that the Pentagon is missing trillions, cannot find where it is. At the same time, in Building 7 of the World Trade Center complex, CIA had an office in there. Accountants had an office in there. There were some other high-ranking three-letter agencies that were in Tower 7. Now, I say all this to say 9/11 was a tragedy. I don't believe that it was a false flag, at least the two Twin Towers. It was terrible. However, what are your thoughts on Building 7? It was completely evacuated. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got killed. And it came down and it did not seem to be touched. Is there a conspiracy that I'm looking at here, or am I reading into it?
I don't have any inside information. I'll start off by saying that. I can only tell you what I heard inside the agency in the immediate aftermath, that that the two main towers collapsing, Building 1 and Building 2, or Tower 1 and Tower 2 collapsing, injured the building in a way that it was like a small dent in the side of a tin can. So the can is strong so long as it's not dented. As soon as there's a chink in the can, the thing just collapses. But also there was a massive store of whatever it was, heating oil or emergency oil supply in the sub basement of 7. And once that went, the whole building came down. Okay. It wouldn't serve any purpose for us to bring the U.S. government to bring that building down. Why would you blow up your own building? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. I get it. So let's piggyback off that. We'll go to the Pentagon, supposedly where the plane, or some people say a missile, but I think that it was a plane.
Yeah.
Where they hit is where the more accountants were trying to look for this lost money.
So no. Yeah, and no. Most of the accountants, we're talking about PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was the external accounting firm at the Pentagon. They ended up just giving up because they're never going to find that money. It's because the Pentagon's just never audited. It's never been audited on a routine basis. And so billions become hundreds of billions, become trillions that just kind of vanish over the years. But most of the area where the plane hit, and I have friends who were sitting in traffic right? It was rush hour. They're sitting in traffic and they watched the plane fly into the side of the building. It was a plane. It was not a missile.
Right.
And much of the area that absorbed the direct hit was actually not being used because it was being renovated. It was just a coincidence. Now there was one conference room that was in use at the time. We lost a couple of colonels, a brigadier general. So, you know, there were some high-ranking people who were killed that day. But it was just luck that much of it was empty, just being renovated.
Well, okay.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to make another point about PricewaterhouseCoopers. A lot of that auditing work is done off-site. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it.
PwC has an absolutely gigantic presence in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, which is just outside Washington. And that's where this army of auditors was housed at the time.
Got it. I definitely wanted to get those two conspiracy theories out of the way so we can talk.
Well, and let me add one other thing, Brendan.
Please.
It's easy to see why there are conspiracy theories, because the government's never really been completely open and frank and transparent about what happened that day. You know, you set up these blue ribbon commissions, and then they don't interview the right people, or they don't interview everybody, or you're not allowed to go to Guantanamo and interview those people, and you're not allowed to interview the CIA people. You end up with a report that nobody's going to end up believing. And that's how conspiracy theories get started. And if I may, I want to add one other thing. July the 6th, 2001, I was hosting a group of Middle Eastern intelligence officers at the CIA. This is something that we used to do every single day. So our partners would come in from all these different countries. You dedicate a whole day to them. You give them a day full of briefings. You give them lunch in the director's dining room, and then they get a photo op with the director, and then you exchange gifts, and then you take them to dinner. And the next day you do it all over again with a group from a different country. So that day, July the 6th, 2001, I was entertaining this group of mid-level guys. It was all men, majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels. They'd come from the Middle East, and I set up a day of briefings for them. Now, I belonged to the CIA's Counterterrorism Center at the time, CTC. I was the head of the group that did training for the Middle East. And, you know, you just have this parade. We used to call it the dog and pony show. You just have this parade of analysts come in, and they brief 15 minutes apiece on their area of expertise. Well, much to my surprise, I had scheduled a briefing with some of the Al-Qaeda analysts from the Osama bin Laden unit called Alex Station. And then much to my surprise, the director of CTC, Ambassador Cofer Black, and the head of operations for Alex Station came in instead of the junior analyst that I had scheduled. So I stood up. I said, gentlemen, this is Ambassador Cofer Black. He's the director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. This is the head of operations. I was shocked. So Cofer sits down, and I talk about this in my first book. He starts off very darkly, and he says, something terrible is going to happen. We don't know exactly what, we don't know exactly where, but it's going to be an unprecedented attack. He said, we're hearing chatter that we've never heard before. We're hearing camp commanders, Al-Qaeda camp commanders on the phone with their students, and they're crying and telling their students, I'll see you in paradise. We're hearing code words for a massive attack. The honey salesman is coming with vast quantities of honey. There's going to be a giant wedding. There's going to be a great soccer match. These are all codes for an attack. So we know something big is coming. We just don't know when and where. And he said to these guys, I beg you, if you have any sources inside Al-Qaeda, please help us. And they just sat there. So I said, Gentlemen, if you have any questions or comments, now's the time. Not a word. They just sat there. So at the end of the day, we did our little gift exchange, and then I sent them back to their hotel. I was going to pick them up for dinner a couple of hours later, and I went back to Kofor's office to thank him for taking the time. And I wasn't working Al Qaeda at the time, not specifically anyway.
Right.
So I went to his office. I said, Kofor, I've got to ask, was that just for their benefit, or were you serious? And he said, oh, I was dead serious. Something terrible is going to happen. And then sure enough, on the morning of September 11th, Kofor and I were going to the White House together. We had an appointment with Condoleezza Rice, and it's silly now to even tell you what the appointment was about. It was about European communist terrorism.
Okay.
There was such a thing back in 2001. So I went over to Kofor's office to tell him that the car was ready to take us to the White House. And his secretary had a TV on her desk. Of course, now there are TVs on every monitor. They're all over the place. But back then, you had to have an actual TV on your desk. And the World Trade Center, one of the towers was on fire. And I said, what happened to the World Trade Center? And she said, a plane flew into it.
Right.
And because I'm an idiot sometimes, I said, you know, that happened once before in the 1930s. A plane flew into the Empire State Building, but it was really foggy then. It's so crystal clear today. Like, how can you not see that you're flying into the World Trade Center? And
Right.
just as I said that, the second plane flew in. And then she turned and looked at me and she said, did you see that, or did I imagine it? And I ran back to my office and I said, guys, 2 planes just hit the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. We're under attack. And then it was just all downhill from there.
Yeah, it was. I'll never forget where I was. I was home on leave. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, California, and I was home in South Carolina on leave. I was actually at the headquarters of my local fire department, washing my truck in the bay, just because. And chief runs out and goes, "Hey, a small plane has hit the World Trade Center. Let's see how they put it out." Now, being firefighters, we want to know. We want to see what they're going to roll out.
Right.
And
Towering Inferno all over again.
Right. And as soon as we all get in the day room, that second plane hits, and it was complete chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had to figure out how to get back to California, and it was madness.
Chaos is the word.
Yeah.
We had the CIA has its own dedicated police force called the SPOs, the Special Protective Officers, and they came and told us to evacuate. Nobody budged, and then they came back an hour later and said, if we didn't evacuate, we're all going to be put under arrest. And so, I mean, the number of people who work at the CIA is classified, but it was gridlock. It took me 2 hours to get out of the parking lot, and then my then girlfriend, she became my wife. She was working on the 5th floor. I was on the 1st floor at the time. And we tried to donate blood and couldn't. The lines were too long. We went to the roof of my building and watched the Pentagon burn. And then I said, this is ridiculous. We got to go back to work.
Right.
So I had abandoned my car on the George Washington Parkway. So I walked back to my car, drove over the median, and then went back to headquarters, and then didn't leave for 4 days. I just slept under my desk, with my jacket balled up as a pillow. Everybody did that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was utter chaos, especially on the military side. We were like,
no doubt.
Yeah, it was. Where are we going? Who's scrambling? What? It was nasty. But so, yeah, it's chaos. It's torture. So how do we go from chaos and everything to how do we link Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden? Where do we link that? And I think,
a couple of ways.
Was that before or after you had captured? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all.
You had captured Zubaydah.
Yeah, it was well before. It was well before. The significance of my capture of my capture of Abu Zubaydah was that in Abu Zubaydah's, not Abu Zubaydah's safe house, but in one of the safe houses, that was, let me back up. We hit 14 sites simultaneously that night. And one of the sites that we hit, we grabbed 3 guys who were members of a Pakistani terrorist group called Lashkar-e-Taiba. And in the Lashkar-e-Taiba safe house, we found a copy of the Al-Qaeda training manual. That was the first time that we were able to link Al-Qaeda to other South Asian terrorist groups. First time. We thought they were operating independently of one another, and we were wrong. So before 9/11, we knew that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were planning something. After 9/11, bin Laden said that he would not rest until the green flag of Islam was flying over the White House, and that they were planning an attack that would dwarf 9/11. So we took that very seriously. You also have to be careful to not underestimate the role of revenge in what we did after 9/11. Listen, this was the worst intelligence failure in the history of the country.
Right.
It was worse than Pearl Harbor. And we knew it was coming, right? We knew it was coming, but we didn't have the details because we hadn't made any recruitments, because NSA couldn't intercept the right phones, because the FBI didn't tell the CIA that 4 of the hijackers were already in the United States. And then the CIA is looking for them in places like Malaysia and Bangkok and, different places where they weren't.
Right.
And so, thousands of Americans died that day. And when the obituaries of people like Kofor Black are written, this is what it's going to say. And so this was a last ditch effort to try to right the wrong as best that they could.
Right. And
then they went overboard, of course, which is now going to be the legacy that's going to be in their obituaries.
It's just, the more that you unfold, it's just one Charlie Foxtrot, like we would say in the military, after another.
Oh, it's just awful.
Oh, and for those of you who don't know what Charlie Foxtrot is, look it up. I can't. But I mean, so we've linked Al-Qaeda, we've linked Osama.
Yep.
Let's fast forward to let's see. You said that you hit 14 objectives at the same time, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but it took a genius to write this plan out, right? Like, it was some high-level tactician that wrote this out, right?
It was me with a legal pad. My first day in Pakistan, my plane flies in at 4 a.m. The driver says, he drops me off at this guest house and he says, okay, I'm going to pick you up at 7. I said, God, please don't. I said, please let me sleep till 8 at least, please. So he picks me up at 8, takes me into the office. The guy I'm replacing says, oh, are you my replacement? I said, yeah. He hands me the keys to his rental car and he says, good luck. And he walks out.
Oh,
that was it.
Oh, no.
That was it. So I meet with the station chief and the deputy like an hour later. And I had known both of them from headquarters. So they said, look, we want you to come up with a standard operating procedure for taking down an Al-Qaeda safe house. I'm like, okay.
Sure.
So I go back to my office. I'm exhausted. I just flew literally halfway around the planet.
Right.
And I'm sitting there with a legal pad. Like, okay, so now what do I do? And I thought, well, if I'm going to take down a safe house, I would want it to be dark. So I wrote 0200 at the top of the page.
Fair.
And then I thought, 9/11 is still an open criminal investigation. This is just, a couple of months after 9/11. So you got to include the FBI. As much as I hated the idea, you have to include the FBI. And we are in Pakistan and it is their country, so you're gonna have to include the Pakistanis.
Right.
So I wrote this up, and I got a tip that there was a safe house there in Islamabad. This is all taking place in Islamabad, Pakistan.
Okay. Yep.
So I went downstairs to the FBI and I said, hey, we're gonna take down the safe house. You want to assign somebody? And they assigned a guy that I became great friends with. And I went over to Pakistani liaison and I said, I'm the new guy. I'm the head of counterterrorism. So we're going to do this raid and we want to take your guys with us. So that night at 0200, we bust down the door of this shack, and it's two 18-year-old kids from Tunisia. One of them immediately burst into tears, and the other one begged me to let him call his mother.
Right. Right.
And I said to the FBI guy, this is the fearsome Al-Qaeda.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we're so afraid of. These are children. So I'm like, no, you're not going to call your mother. We don't have arrest powers. So I turned him over to the FBI. We took him to the Rawalpindi jail about 10 miles away. And I thought the next day I got to the office and I said, this was like really easy.
Right.
Really, really easy. And maybe that's the exception to the rule. So a friendly Arab station chief called me and said, listen, I've got some information. I think I know an Egyptian Islamic Jihad, EIJ, safe house. Now, EIJ, a couple of years before 9/11, had merged with Al-Qaeda. EIJ was headed by Ayman al-Zawahiri, who had been one of the killers of Anwar Sadat back in 1981. So I took the address and called the FBI and called the Pakistanis. And I said, okay, we're going to do it again. 2:00 in the morning, we bust down the door of the house. And sure enough, we got this EIJ, kind of a big muckety muck. And there were women and children in the house. So we separated the women and children. We, cuffed the men. And then we start doing an inventory of the house, right? You want all the computers, all the cell phones, all the paper, everything. Everything has intelligence value, everything. So I thought, okay, this is good. And this went on for about 6-7 weeks. And then I got a call from my boss. It's funny. The weekend in Pakistan is Friday and Saturday. Right. And so Saturday was the only day that I allowed myself the luxury of sleeping in until 8. Because we were working 16, 18, sometimes 20-hour days.
Right.
The work was hard and long. So he woke me up at like 7 in the morning on Saturday, and he said, you got to get to the office right away. Something came up. So I rushed to the office. It's the station chief, the deputy, the FBI chief, and me. And he said, we got a call about an hour earlier that Abu Zubaydah is somewhere in the country and we have to catch him. We have to take him alive. And I'll tell you the truth. Everybody turns and looks at me. The truth is, I'm thinking, Abu Zubaydah, that name sounds vaguely familiar to me. Because remember, I'm not an Al-Qaeda expert at this point. I was a volunteer and an Arabic speaker. And I had just come out of a critical threat for terrorism assignment. So I had the background. And it dawned on me that there had been an article in Time magazine that week saying that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. So he was the first high-value target that we sought. This is a very long story. I'm going to make very short. We ended up having to hit, I said 14 sites earlier. It was actually 13. We came up with 14. But when we were doing the pre-raid survey, we realized that one of them was a payphone in a shish kebab, at a shish kebab stand. And so we, cut that off a list, and we actually hit 13 sites that night. And in one of those sites was Abu Zubaydah and two other men on the upper floor. There were more than a dozen on the lower floor. They were sort of low-level fighters. Abu Zubaydah was on the second floor with a bomb maker from Syria and with his Abu Zubaydah's bodyguard. So they climbed to the roof of the building. When we tried to bust the door down, the door was reinforced with steel. And so with our battering rams, usually just one pop and it just splinters. And this one, we worked on it for a good 15 or 20 minutes. And they climbed to the roof of the house, and then they tried to jump to the roof of the neighboring house. Now, I had specifically said, we have to take him alive. And as soon as they started jumping, this Pakistani policeman just started opening fire with an AK-47.
Mm-hmm.
The Syrian jumped first, killed him instantly, and he just dropped to the ground, dead before he even hit the ground. The pictures that I have are absolutely gruesome. Abu Zubaydah jumped second and was shot in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach. And then the Syrian jumped third and was shot through the leg, although that's a story in and of itself. So we rushed him to the worst place on earth, Faisalabad Hospital. And by then it was like 3:30 in the morning. Word got around the Al-Qaeda community that we had gotten him. And so they began driving by the hospital and just opening fire on the hospital. I said to the Pakistani colonel that I was with, if they realize how lightly armed we are, we're dead. I said, can you get a helicopter in here? And he said, I think so. So he made a call. 20 minutes later, a helicopter lands in the parking lot. And I put my shirt over my nose. I walked into the operating room and I said, Doc, wrap it up. We got to go. They sewed him closed as best they could. And 4 of us plus Abu Zubaydah got onto the helicopter, and we flew him to a military base about 50 miles away. And I was afraid that I was going to fall asleep. Because I'm on the phone with Islamabad. I'm on the phone with CIA headquarters, and and it's like the director on the phone, George Tenet, the director of the CIA. It's not like I'm talking to a secretary, and he's like, "Do we have him? Do we have him? Yes, sir, we have him." You can hear cheering in the background. We got him. We have him. But I've been up for 40 hours at this point. So I tore up a sheet and I tied him to the bed by his wrists and his ankles. And I sat at the foot of his bed, and I turned the ceiling fan on full blast to make myself uncomfortably cold, so that I wouldn't doze off. And I just sat there and I waited. And if I found myself getting tired, I would get up and walk around. I went to talk to the bodyguard a couple of times, and I kept myself awake. He finally came out of his coma after about 24 hours. And he, like I say, he was tied to the bed like this. And he motioned for me to come over next to him. So I went over next to him and I moved his oxygen mask off to the side. And I said to him in Arabic, Shusmek, what is your name? And he shook his head like that. So I said it again, Shusmek. And he says to me in beautiful English, I will not speak to you in God's language. And I said, that's okay, Abu Zubaydah. We know who you are. And then he started crying and he said, please, brother, kill me. Take the pillow and kill me. And I said, oh, no, nobody's going to kill you. You're going to get the best medical care that the American government can provide. We've been looking for you for a long time. He was petrified. He wanted to know what was going to happen. And I told him the truth. I said, I don't have any idea what's going to happen to you. I don't have any idea. But I said, I'm going to give you some advice. I am the nicest guy that you're going to meet in this experience. My friends, they're not nice like I am. So if you do one thing, it's that you have to cooperate. And he said, you seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy, and I'll never cooperate. So I was
Okay.
for 56 hours and we talked about everything. He cried constantly. He would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. And I said, wait a minute. I said, you're not the victim here. There were
Right.
50,000 people in those towers. What did you think was going to happen? Did you think we wouldn't try to find you and kill bin Laden? You're not the victim. He wanted to talk to his mom in Palestine, and he would recite poetry to me that he had written. We debated Islam versus Christianity, and it was nuts. And then finally, after 56 hours, an unmarked CIA jet flew in, and three.
Now you knew somebody on that jet, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. When the jet landed, we took him out. He was petrified. He asked me to hold his hand. So 3 FBI agents and I carried his gurney out to the plane. We maneuvered him onto the plane, and then we laid him across the luggage rack at the back, and we tied it down. And everybody on the plane had black hoods and masks, and all in black. And one of them says, "John?" And I said, "Who are you?" And he just lifts up his mask a little bit. And he was my last boss at the agency. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I came to pick up your prisoner." I said, "Where are you taking him?" And he said, "Oh, dude, I'm sorry. You don't have a need to know." And I
Right.
said, "Oh, fair enough." And he said, "Well, who is he?" And I said, "Oh man, I'm sorry. You don't have a need to know." And we laughed, but it was
Right.
true. It was none of
Yeah.
my business where they were taking him. And it was none of his business who the prisoner was, because
Right.
his job was to take the prisoner from point A to point B. And my job was to capture the prisoner and turn him over to the rendition team.
Yep.
And I whispered to Abu Zubaydah at the end, I said, "Remember, you have to cooperate." And he squeezed my hand. And then I never saw him again.
And that leads us to, you have sat here with this man, made sure he was alive, made sure he was safe. You had told him, cooperate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it seems like with that last hand squeeze, okay, I get it, I'll cooperate.
Yeah.
Now let's fast forward. How many times was he waterboarded?
87 times.
Uh-huh.
And the sad part of that is he was cooperating. Listen, the CIA and the FBI have always hated each other. Always. From the time that the CIA was created in 1947 with passage of the National Security Act, we've always hated each other. So the secret site is overseas. Now, normally, the CIA always has primacy overseas. The FBI always has primacy in the United States. But 9/11, as I said, was an open criminal investigation. And so we're overseas, but the FBI has primacy. Well, the FBI is really, really good at interrogations. What they do, and they've been doing this since the Nuremberg investigations, right, in 1945 and 46.
Right.
What they do is they establish a rapport with the prisoner. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes it takes months. You just never know. You offer him a cigarette, you offer him an orange, you offer him, some paper and a little nubby pen that he can use to write a letter to his folks through the Red Cross. You establish a relationship to the point where he begins to open up to you. And that's what FBI agent Ali Soufan did. And Abu Zubaydah opened up to him. Now, Abu Zubaydah gave us some very specific intelligence, very valuable intelligence. And what he gave us was this. He gave us first the Al-Qaeda wiring diagram. Now, that may seem completely elementary, but we didn't really know anything about this group. We knew bin Laden was at the top.
Right.
We knew Zawahiri was number 2. We knew that Mohammed Atef was number 3, but we killed him in Afghanistan in October.
Yep.
So we figured Abu Zubaydah was number 3. We didn't know anything else. So Abu Zubaydah explained to us the concept of stovepiped cells. There were cells all over the world, but no cell knew what any other cell was doing, right? So if one got captured, they couldn't say, oh, well, wait a minute, let me tell you what's happening in Bangkok.
Right.
You know, save themselves. They didn't know what was happening in Bangkok. They didn't even know there was a cell in Bangkok. So what Abu Zubaydah said was, in response to a question like, if you were going to do an operation in Dusseldorf, how would you do that? And he said, well, there's this guy, Muhammad, and Muhammad has weapons, and here's his cell phone number, and he has a cousin, Abdullah, and Abdullah knows how to build bombs, and here's his email address, and Abdullah's got a friend, Rashid, he lives across the street, and here's his email address. So we can call the Germans and say, hey, listen, you guys have a serious problem in Dusseldorf, and here's the information. So that's what he gave us. The other thing that he gave us was absolutely made out of gold. We knew starting in 1996 that there was a very bad guy out there who went by the nom de guerre Mukhtar, right? That's all we knew. There's this really bad guy out there and he's Mukhtar. So have you ever heard of the Bojinka operation in the Philippines?
I have. I don't have many details on it, but I have.
The Bojinka operation was a plan hatched by Mukhtar in Manila in 1996 to simultaneously hijack 10 747s and fly them into buildings up and down the west coast of the United States.
Yep.
A cleaning lady accidentally stumbled on these documents and called the Filipino police. They raided the apartment. They turned the information over to us. Mukhtar got away. But the operation was disrupted. Biggest terrorist operation that's ever been conceived, and it was disrupted. So he asked us if we knew Mukhtar, and Ali said, yeah, Mukhtar was planning the Bojinka operation, but we don't know who he is. And he said, you don't know who he is. He's the most dangerous man in the world. And Ali said, yeah, we don't really know anything about him. And he says, his name is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Well, we had never heard of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Right.
4 months later, he's in our custody. But it was thanks to Abu Zubaydah that we finally learned who Mukhtar was, that Mukhtar was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, that he had lived much of his young adult life in the United States, attending North Carolina A&M. And we were able to pinpoint our I have to be careful with my language. We were able to track him down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then the CIA was jealous of the progress that the FBI was making. They took over the interrogation. They immediately started torturing him. He clammed up. They almost killed him. He had to be revived, right? They drowned him during the waterboarding. He had to be revived, and they revived him just so they could torture him more.
Yep. And
then this went back and forth, and then he's moved from one secret prison to another, to another, to another. There were 6 in the end before he and all the other prisoners were finally sent to Guantanamo, and that's where they all are today.
I mean, it's wild, the circumstances, and just it sounds like intelligence is a lot of luck.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you know, and this was motivating in training, because they said, listen, we have to be right every single time. The terrorists only have to be lucky once.
Yep.
So the pressure's on.
So we go to Zubaydah is waterboarded 80 plus times.
Yeah.
On top of some of the other torture techniques that were used. So that brings me to the question. Okay. It takes a lot of courage and self-fortitude and just a great sense of honor to come out and blow the whistle on the CIA, you know, because that just, first of all, that proves to me that you're a man of good standings, of good moral, and, you know, willing to sacrifice for what's right. But how did that conversation, I'm going to assume you and your wife sat down or whatever and had a chat about it and whatever. Yeah. So how did the conversation end up to the whistleblowing when you were, I believe it was on ABC News when you first said it? How did that go?
Well, first, when I got back from Pakistan, I was approached by a senior officer in the counterterrorism center who asked me if I wanted to be trained in the torture techniques. I said I had a moral and ethical problem with it, and I thought that it was illegal. Right? We have the 1946. It's called the Anti-Torture Act of 1946,
right,
which specifically outlaws exactly those techniques that we were using. Then we were not only signatories to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, we were the authors of the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which specifically outlaws those techniques.
Right.
We executed Japanese soldiers for waterboarding American POWs. We executed them. That was a death penalty offense. The law never changed. So how all of a sudden, like magic, in 2002, it's suddenly legal and permissible to do this? So I said no. They asked 14 of us, and I was the only one who said no. So I left the agency in 2004, convinced that somebody was going to say something, and nobody ever said anything. And then in 2007, Brian Ross from ABC News called me and said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I had never laid a hand on Abu Zubaydah or on anybody else. And I said, your source is either deeply mistaken or he's a liar. Well, later that week, President Bush gave a press conference, and he looked right in the camera and he said, "We do not torture."
Right. I remember that.
And I said to my wife, I said, he's a bald-faced liar. He's looking us right in the eye and he's lying. And then a few days later, it was a Friday, and Bush was walking from the south portico of the White House to the helicopter to go to Camp David for the weekend. And a reporter shouted a question about torture. And he turned and he said, well, if there is torture, it's because of a rogue CIA officer. And I said to my wife, that
sounds like a setup.
I said to my wife, they're going to set me up as the fall guy. Right? Because I was the malcontent who wouldn't get with the program. So I called Brian Ross. I said, I'll give you your interview. And I decided that whatever he was going to ask me, I was going to tell the truth. So I said three things. I said the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. And then everything went down the toilet from there.
And there's so much more to your story, but we're coming up on the 45-minute mark.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you this. Would you be willing to come back for a volume 2?
Sure.
Because
Happy to.
I would still want to get into the war in Iraq and some questions.
Oh, I got a lot to say about that.
Well, because I want to tell you, I was there in 2003 for the invasion, and we talked about some other stuff off camera.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that I look into it, the more I'm like, did I go over there for nothing?
For nothing.
Nothing.
First of all, thank you. And thank God for people like you who did go over there when their country asked them to or forced them to. But for what? I mean, I was there too. I served in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. For what?
Yeah, I still to this day don't know what I did over there.
Would we accomplish?
I mean, and see, that leads into more like we want to talk about the Taliban, but we'll have to do that on volume 2.
That's right. That's going to be a good conversation. I'm delighted to come back. Happy to do it.
Okay, real quick, my wife has a question, and if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't. But she says, "What is your perspective on Gaza right now?
Yeah,
and where is this headed?"
I think this is one of the most horrific wartime situations that we've seen, certainly in my lifetime. I think the Israelis, listen, first of all, October 7th was terrible, right? Hamas killed 1,500 innocent civilians. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Terrorist attack, awful. The Israeli response has been criminal by any measure. Crimes against humanity, war crimes, targeting civilians, almost 30,000 people dead, 90% of which, according to the Israeli government, are civilians. and now they're being squeezed in Rafah along the Egyptian border with literally nowhere to go. There was a piece in the New York Times just yesterday or the day before yesterday saying that the plan, and this has been laid out in a bill in the Knesset, the plan is to throw all of the Palestinians out of Gaza, send them to any country in the world that'll take them, and then have illegal Israeli settlements in Gaza. So no, what we're seeing is a terrible crime against humanity. It needs to stop.
Well, and that leads me to this question, and I'll set it up. And then, so Vietnam, while everybody was back in Vietnam, everybody's paying attention to Vietnam. Well, the CIA is doing this thing over in Laos.
That's right.
Where they have dropped more bombs on Laos than they used in the entire World War II.
That's right. So
this leads me to believe, okay, we've got Israel and Hamas going at it. What's going on in Yemen right now? See what I'm saying?
We could do a whole show on Yemen.
Yes, we could.
It's complicated in Yemen. So the Houthis, of course, forced out the government of Ali Abdullah Saleh a couple of years ago. They ended up killing Saleh. They blew him up.
Yep.
And they took over not the whole country, mostly the capital city of Sana'a and the mountains north of Sana'a.
Right.
But that's good enough for control of the country. So the problem is that the Houthis, despite their denials, and listen, I consider myself pretty hard left, but you got to call a spade here. The Houthi government is an Iranian proxy government.
Right.
The Iranians finance them, the Iranians arm them, and supply missiles and weapons and this, that, and the other thing. Now, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Bahrainis have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Yemen, right? Bombing civilians and bombing schools and bombing hospitals. So this isn't to justify any of their criminal actions. But the Houthis, who can't even feed their own people, and I mean that quite literally, have decided that in solidarity with the Palestinians, they're going to start firing rockets or sending suicide drones into the Red Sea to bomb civilian ships.
Yep.
I said this, I have a radio show every day here in Washington. I said this on the very first day that the Houthis launched an attack on a ship. I said, I sat in on meetings at the CIA where responses to things like this were discussed. And I'm telling you, the Houthis are going to get blasted and a whole lot of people are going to die unnecessarily, because the way we do it is if you kill one of us, we're going to kill 20 of you. And we're starting to see that play out now. Now, that policy, of course, is wrong too.
Right.
But you can't, they say, all of these ships have ties to Israel. No, actually, they don't.
Right.
Like one of the first ships, it was a British ship registered in the Bahamas with a Greek captain and a Filipino and Vietnamese crew. And it was going from a port in Turkey to Singapore. Where's the tie to Israel? And you fire a rocket at it. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to get bombed. So I think that situation is going to get worse before it gets better.
I'm afraid so, and that's why I kind of linked the Vietnam and the bombings with this, because it just always seems, and I'll make this quick. It just always seems like, hey, look at this hand. Now you can't see over here.
Exactly. They've done that throughout history since 1947.
Right, and probably even earlier than that. It just seems like we have so much more to talk about, but limited time. So let's go ahead and start the outros here. Where can people find you?
Thank you. I've got a Substack, John Kiriakou. You see the spelling of my name right there on Substack. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. I've got a radio show every day in Washington called Political Misfits. And there's a TV show that unfortunately you can't see it in the United States. You can see it in 65 other countries.
Imagine that.
But not in the United States. So yeah, I'm easy to find. Substack and Twitter is the best way to do it.
And I will tell you the secret to finding and watching his TV show is get a VPN and change your location on the VPN, and you'll be able to watch shows.
It's called The Whistleblowers.
Oh, so fascinating to meet you, talk to you. This was a good show.
Thank you.
Ex-military
Thank you.
wife. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, love to have you back for a second session sometime down the road.
Sounds good.
And thank you for your time, man. We will let you get out of here. But
thank you
again, one last time, everybody. John Kiriakou.
Perfect.
Okay. Check him out. I will put links in the description to his Substack, etc. And be safe. And thank you for standing up for what was right and what you believe in. And we need more people like you in this country.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
All right.
I'll
Thank
talk
you
to you
so
soon.
much, John. Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, guys, what you guys think? I know it's a different type of format than I usually do. And we had tons more questions for John, but for what he says, he'll come back and we'll get into the Iraq invasion. We will get into his paranormal. Oh, see, we couldn't even hit his paranormal stuff. But yeah, I wanted to introduce everybody to John, and I want you to meet the whistleblower who did an amazing, brave thing. Also, when he comes back, we'll talk about his time in jail, where he pretty much lived like a boss. So let me know in the comments in the chat if you guys want another go round with John Kiriakou. I do. But as I always say, and I think I'm just going to end it a little early because, football and all, because go sports. But, I'm trying to think what we need to cover. If there's anything I need to cover before we go. And I don't think so. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Like I've been saying, this is going to be a different show. And when I bring it back, I'll go ahead and name it Shaman Sundays Declassified again for when I bring John back. So I want to thank each and every one of you for taking your time out. Time is valuable, most valuable thing we got, and you spent it with me. Love each and every one of you. And as I always end my shows, it's not about surviving the storm, but it's how you dance in the rain that counts. I love each and every one of you guys. Come join me next Sunday, where my guest will be Ken Irish, the crypto punk zoologist or something like that. It's going to be fun. Anyway, love you guys. See you Sunday.